Welcome to 21st Century Saints, our podcast and live stream series for members, those affiliated with, those who hang around, those who think people in the Church of Jesus Christ have got, of Latter-day Saints have got really good patter or have got really bad patter. Anything that you think is in the world of Mormonism that you are interested in, we are talking about right here. And it's for members of the church, specifically in the United Kingdom, but also around the world. So it's really good to have you all here. We are super sorry we've had a little bit of a technical issue tonight with the previous link working. So hopefully as we do our intro, you will all be able to find us and come and join us. Where do we want to start? First of all, please, we would love it if you would like and subscribe to our page. It really, really helps us in the work that we're doing. We also have links on Donor Box if you would like to contribute, and most especially we would like to say a huge thank you to those of you who have been making donations to us. It means so much that that you guys have thought of us. You know, you guys work hard for your money, and we just really appreciate that you've thought that our work is of value. So thank you so much, and we hope that it continues to be of value. Okay, while we are gathering our audience like chickens round about us, come gather round, kids. Alana's back with us after her break. How you doing, girl?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I'm really glad you've done an incredible job over the past few months with everything that has been going on. So well done. You're looking fantastic. Okay, it is Scotland and we are not used to this, but the weather here is crazy hot. It has been crazy hot. Today's just hot, which is like just bizarre for Scotland. So, you know, I think let's go for a first little dose of reality. Alana's just going for it there, but I haven't podcasted with my pawn shoulders yet. I haven't done it.
I was going to say that's why I've got my pawn shoulders out, because it's on.
I've got my modesty cardigan on, because for a second, let's talk about how way back Oscar Wilde's wife was tooting the horn for rational dress. It is not rational to be walking about wearing extra layers in a heat wave when all of the government advice is saying wear things to keep you cool. So yeah, porn shoulders being revealed tonight. We are going for it. So now that we've got our feed seems to be stable, I think we've sorted all of our technical issues. Again, it's really good to have you all here with us. We are really excited. Well, we did have Alana for a second there, but I think the gremlins are booting her out. You know what? We're going to wing it. Hopefully it's going to work. She'll be back with us in a minute. Meanwhile, we want to say a really warm welcome to our guest tonight, who is someone who means a lot to especially Alana, because you're family, but to me too. You are a stalwart in Scotland. So many people know you, so many people are familiar with your name, and you are very, very well loved. So it's great to have you here, and we're really glad that you're here. Would you like to say hi to our audience and just tell everybody who you are and a little bit about you?
Yeah, thank you for the nice words, Jane. I don't know if I agree with you about the stalwart side of things, but that's me, I suppose, just trying to be realistic. But I really appreciate what you said. So I'm Drew Hunter. I'm sure people who were planning to watch this live tonight are aware of the fact that I'm coming on. I am originally from Paisley, born in Glasgow, brought up in Paisley, went to church. My parents joined the church when I was 4 years old. I have an older brother and a younger sister. So I was raised in the church. So I spent right up until the age of 17 in Paisley Ward and Paisley Stake, and then got married really young and moved over to Airdrie in Glasgow Stake. And that's where I've been since then. I still live in Airdrie, and I married into the Bryce family And obviously one of our hosts tonight is Alana, who is my sister-in-law.
So what brought you over to Glasgow Steak was the fact that love, obviously, but also, so let's just ask right now, is it a better steak, would you say? Does Glasgow beat Paisley?
Well,
come on, at one point you would have just said yes. You would have.
Well, I've spent most of my life over in Glasgow Steak, the vast majority of my life in Glasgow Steak. I have a lot of good memories, though, of Paisley Steak.
Yeah.
Because that's the steak of my childhood and also my youth years. So it's just two very separate experiences. So
And
I can't say that one's better than the other.
Yeah, I'm totally trying to bait you into saying something that you're going to get pelters for later on, and I don't regret it. I will continue to do it. But here is why I'm really excited to introduce Drew to our audience. We have all known each other for a really long time. Obviously, Alana, you're part of the family, and we've kind of been able to see each other's, all of our journeys happening and unfold and be part of that journey. And recently you had released podcast episode, you'd released a YouTube video, and you chronicle what has brought you to this point and where you are with the church. Now, I am extremely hopeful. I think you've indicated there may be a follow-up, there may be a few follow-ups, which will be awesome. Because it was very, very well received. It was, loads of people were listening to it. It's made an impact, and I want to talk a little bit about that impact. And I don't think it's just simply people who want to have a nosy to see how Drew's getting on. I think there's a lot more than that. I think you're speaking to things that are very, very meaningful for people. I know that Peter Bleakley's planning to maybe quote you in one of his future episodes. You'd said some really interesting things. But for me, I'm listening to it and I have so many questions. There are things where I wanted to say, right, okay, could we put a pin in that? Because I want to ask you more about this thing. So yeah, this is kind of my opportunity to, we will put the link to your original video in the show notes and really recommend that everybody go take a look. And have a listen, but this is going to be sort of my opportunity to get you to maybe expand on some of the things that you say and maybe take some turns that you maybe hadn't yet. So what I would like to know first is you talk about your background in the church, you're raised in the church, you talk about what that's like, but what I didn't get from the podcast episode yet is a sense of what kind of kids you were. So how engaged were you? How were you a rebellious little kid? Or were you really, really trying your best to follow the prophet and favourite primary songs and all of those things?
That's a good question. When my parents joined, missionaries had chapped the door at the house when they had been out proselyting. And so I was an infant. I was too young to be baptized, obviously. And then my parents joined. My brother was old enough to be baptized, I'm sure, yeah. So everyone in the family got baptized almost immediately, apart from me, because I was too young. So all my living memory is just the church. I don't have any memories of anything else but the church, even though I wasn't technically born into it. I basically was. And when I was growing up, I felt I'm not going to speak about family life. I'm just going to speak about church life in the context of my family.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, I felt as if I had a lot. I look back and have a lot of good experiences, and I enjoyed my childhood growing up. And when I was younger, I was like any other child, I think. I carried on. I was a bit silly. I remember I've got two very close friends from Paisley Ward. I don't want to mention their names, but they're lifelong friends, and they're like brothers to me, these two people. And we used to, whenever there was a baptism at the church, we used to go to the first part of the baptismal service in the chapel. And this became a habit for us. Whenever everyone moved through from the chapel into the font area to witness the baptism, myself and my two friends would sneak away just after the baptism had taken place, because everyone's moving back to the chapel, and we would run into the cultural hall, hide up in the stage behind the cupboards. And for some reason, for what seemed to be a few years, we did this every time there was a baptism. And while the second part of the service was taking place, we would be in the cultural hall setting up tables coming off the stage so that we could create these big massive slides. So one table leg would go up on the upper part of the stage, and then we'd put a table down on the floor of the cultural hall so that we could make this one continual slide. And so we were doing things like that. I don't know if a lot of kids did that type of thing. Maybe it was just us. When I became a teenager, myself and those few friends that we had in the ward, we were rebellious in the sense that we would, when I became a priesthood holder, an Aaronic priesthood holder, we would pass a sacrament, and we would come out and we would moan and complain about church and say how much we hated it, and we really meant it. And we would say to each other, we can't wait until we're old enough to leave and no longer go. And then over the course of the next year or two, the three of us had this change of heart, and we became we became Holy Joes, basically. And we attended all our seminary classes. We tried to revise and memorize all of our scripture mastery scriptures. We attended all the activities. We tried to fulfill all of our assignments. And so in most of my teenage years, along with those few friends in the ward, we became very invested in the church in a way that we felt was important. And so that's the way I was. Interestingly, we would try and spend as much time as we could with missionaries who were serving in the ward, to the point where I would sometimes ignore doing homework or things that I should be doing for my own education and want to spend time on splits with missionaries, because I was determined, along with my friends, that we would serve a full-time mission, that I would serve a mission. And so in some ways I neglected the things that were really important, but I felt as if what I was doing with the missionaries was somehow more
important. The most important. Yeah, absolutely.
That's mainly because I wasn't mature enough academically at that age. I didn't appreciate the value of education, a proper education at that age. And it wasn't until years later that I realised that I need to knuckle down and get an education.
Let's talk about education then. Why isn't that the most important thing that I mean, it's very, very clear from for the Strength of Youth teachings that you should get an education, that it is really important, but we get all of these very contradictory messages that actually the most important thing is, yeah, you should be going on splits, that you should be attending all of these meetings. Also making sure that you do not study on a Sunday. You know, there's all of this this pressure to actually kind of know that the unwritten rule is that it isn't as important. What effect does that have on, would you say, Scottish youth? You in particular, but you know, what are you seeing?
Well, I don't know what it's like. I can only imagine what it's like for, say, youth who live in Utah or Idaho, where there's a high population of LDS people. For youth in Scotland, so this is way back in the late 80s, early 90s, we're talking about here. There's a lot of pressure on young people to just basically live the standards you mentioned for the Strength of Youth. Live those standards and make sure that you are morally clean and that you're dressing appropriately and you are living the word of wisdom and various other things. But those are things that it was easier to do because we'd been brought up that way. It might not have been easier for other youth. I'm just talking about myself and the people who were in my group. But I do remember that it was a lot of pressure because I knew back then that I was expected to work hard at school and get a good education. Me not doing that was just a personal lack of maturity.
Okay.
And I just I had this tunnel vision that I knew I had to go on a mission. And that was more important than anything else that I was preparing for at that time in my life. And so, yes, I do think there was a lot of pressure on, there was for me and the people that I was with, to live all of these standards and obey all these commandments and do all of these things. Young men, there was more of, and there still is more of an expectation on young boys to serve a full-time mission, although girls can serve a mission as well. But it did feel like there was a pressure there. And I can't blame the church for me not getting an education. That was a personal thing. In retrospect, you could say that I was struggling to hold everything together, but the reality was I was just so blooming immature and didn't value education at that time.
Which is kind of standard for people in this broader geographical area. It's now is considered, specifically the area that we're in, is considered a social deprivation area. So it's not a given that children are going to stay in school for the amount of years that free education is on offer. It's not a given that they're going to go on to further education, all of those kinds of things. So I think, it's keeping in mind that there is this expectation that you're going to have to support a family. But when a mission comes in, we know that boys in America who were serving around that time, they would be able to very easily put the education part on hold, or things would wait for them, or you can kind of slot it in a bit easier. Here, I think there's a real choice to be made. So you don't serve a mission in your story, and I think that's one of the things that has possibly, the lessons that you've learned from that time, I think is one of the things that's helped shape this really endearing person, because you see a tension while you're really young between the lived experience of being a normal human teenage boy who's in love with a normal human teenage girl, and you don't serve a mission. Your family starts really early, and I really liked that one of the earliest impressions I had of you was someone who knew that things were complicated. When you were speaking in your podcast about that time, your family are super supportive. Is that right? You're the Bryces, the Hunters, kind of you kind of, you're all what would we say, sort of solidified. You guys are really supported in your early marriage. Is that right? You don't have a lot of if I'm wrong, call me out, like I'm maybe picking this up wrong.
Yeah, you are wrong.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
See, I want to believe in rainbows and cloud cuckoo land.
No, it's okay.
It wasn't like that. I'm so sorry.
The reality was that whenever Tracy was pregnant, see, the thing is, I need to say this in a way that doesn't sound as if I'm being big-headed. In our respective stakes, so I'm Paisley Stake, Tracy's Glasgow Stake. In our respective stakes, Tracy and I are considered to be extremely faithful youth that a lot of other youth are supposed to look up to. And so whenever Tracy fell pregnant, this became, I think I mentioned it in the video this way, it became a scandal. And these things tend to be scandals, especially in the church. And so I had to tell my parents, Tracy had to tell her parents. And the experience that Tracy had and the experience that I had, with each of our parents, but also with each of our local leaders in our respective stakes, are very different experiences.
Oh, okay.
Because geographically we are split because we're in two different stakes. And although the church is a universal church, so to speak, it's all around the world and it's supposed to operate the same way, local leaders do things and perform discipline, or if you want to call it that, and sometimes in very different ways from leaders in another stake. And so my parents expected, even after I told them that Tracy was pregnant and that I wanted to stay with Tracy and be with Tracy, they had this idea in their head that they still wanted me to serve a mission. There was even talk of, and I think I said this in the video as well, there was even talk of, certainly from our side of things in our stake, the possibility of the baby being put up for adoption as well. Now, I am 17 years old, and so is Tracy. We are the same age. We're only 5 days apart from each other. She was born first, and I was born 5 days later, and then 17 years later we met. But Tracy's family embraced her, and parents were very supportive. Tracy's dad was the bishop at the time. My parents, it was just a scandal, and they were just embarrassed, and they felt as if I was a failure at that period of time. I don't think that lasted, that they felt that I was a failure. But the leaders in my stake, the day after I'd told my parents, all three members of the stake presidency appeared at my house. I was upstairs in my bedroom on the third floor, and my mum shouted on me to come downstairs in the evening the following day. I had no idea why I was coming downstairs. Things were very tense in the house anyway. And when I walked into the living room, all three members of the stake presidency were there, sitting, looking at me. And I knew why they were there, and I sat down, and then I spent the next half hour being spoken to by a group of men who, at the time, I looked to as my stake priesthood leaders, who I felt were very good men, as far as I was concerned. And, you know, the content of that meeting.
Did they speak to you on your own, or were your parents present in the room at the time?
Do you know, my memory is pretty hazy with that, and I can't say for certain that my parents were in the room.
No.
I think one of them was.
Right.
I think maybe my mum was in the room, but I actually can't remember for certain. I really can't remember.
Yeah, I was just curious, because I think even as a 17-year-old, like, coming down to three people sitting there can be quite overwhelming and daunting for someone of that age. You know, like, just, I know how it felt for me as an adult going into kind of, I guess what someone's just said, kind of disciplinary council almost kind of thing. You know, with all these men sitting. So that's why I was just curious if any of your parents were present.
I think that's a really insightful comment from Paul Johnson there. Thank you for that. That it does have the effect of, I wouldn't imagine before they've come to see you that they've thought, let's have an informal disciplinary council. But the effect it certainly has is that on some level of one. I'm sure it's, you know, people who loved you and are extremely concerned and really need you to know the things that you need to do to get back on track, right?
Yeah.
I assume that they were very clear in what they were looking for you to do next.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I was told then, and I wasn't surprised by this because I knew what the standards were. I was, as I already said, one of the youth who was faithful and was trying their hardest and was really trying to be as righteous as possible. And so I understood what Tracy and I both understood what we had done. I just wasn't prepared for the consequences. And I don't suppose you are in a lot of these situations. But when I look back on it now in hindsight, it certainly did. It's a disciplinary council. It's an unofficial disciplinary council that I didn't have any knowledge of until I walked into the room. And I was told that as a result of everything that had happened, that I would no longer be able to perform Aaronic priesthood duties like blessing and passing the sacrament for a certain amount of time, and had to go through the repentance process. Something else that I'm reminded of, that there was a question asked of me in that chat with those three members of the state presidency, and the question was in reference to the fact that Tracy and I had premarital sex. The question was, to me, a 17-year-old boy, was this love or was this lust? Now, I haven't thought about it that much since then, and it's only since I've kind of came away from church that I've had time to think about events that have happened way in the past. And being asked that question at that age it sets off alarm bells in my head just now.
Yeah.
At the time, I just felt as if I was put on the spot, and I just thought, well, I better say the right answer. It was lust. And then there was this thing in the back of my mind saying, but I really love Tracy. And I suppose they're referring to what we did more than how we feel about each other, but it confused me at the time. And I just felt, well, I'm being put in a position here. I need to give the correct answer because they're looking for the correct answer. And so...
Well, because if you don't, you're not being repentant enough, right? If you had said anything different, then you wouldn't be showing those signs of real repentance that they're looking for. So you're already repenting or going through that technical process of church repentance immediately, right? Was based on that, was adoption ever realistically on the table?
After that, I'm sure it was mentioned in that discussion with the three members of state presidency. I can't remember to what detail it was spoken about, but to answer your question, it never became a serious consideration
for you,
for me, or for Tracy. There was a couple of times where meetings were arranged for both sets of parents with people to be intermediaries so that we could have a reasonable discussion. So there was a meeting arranged, and it was a member of the state presidency, a previous member of the state presidency in Glasgow Stake, who attended, someone that I respected and still respect a lot, who showed an awful lot of love and concern. This was a leader from Glasgow Stake who became the person who kind of oversaw the meetings with parents. And that person was just very supportive of Tracy and I. But there was a lot of backlash from my mum and dad because they still had this idea in their heads that I had to go on a mission. I don't know if there was private conversations that my parents might have had about adoption, but it was never really given serious consideration, the whole question of adoption. And so it never happened. So
in your journey then, what happens next? Because this is the establishment of a family. I mean, obviously there's the church, the church welcoming of that has not been one of excitement and happiness, but that's how your family started. Tell me about the early years with as raising a family in the church. What's that like for you?
Well, I was not prepared to be a father at the age of 17. But I'm sure Tracy would say that she was not prepared to be a mother at the age of 17 as well. But that was a situation that we'd put ourselves in. And so we got married the following year in the February. And I just loved the fact that we were married because we had fallen head over heels for each other at the age of 16. And so as the months went by, and then Amber, our first, was born, there was a lot of excitement. That was out of all the 7 children that Tracy that we've had, Amber was the most difficult to give birth to, and so that was the longest labour, and everything after that, all the other 6 children, it seemed to be a little bit. I'm saying that from the perspective of someone who's watching Tracy give birth, but she would tell you that herself, that it was easier than the first, or the rest were easier. But in reality, I just felt like a duck out of water in being a father. And when I look back on it, and Tracy will say that as well, I was pretty useless as a young father. And I put that down to my age and my lack of maturity. I do believe that girls mature, definitely mature faster than boys. I know that's a very general statement, but in our case, it was true. So it wasn't easy, but an interesting thing as well was once we were married, and then eventually when Amber was born, right up until Amber was 3 or 4 years old, I still couldn't get out of my head the fact that I had never served a mission. And I felt a lot of guilt for not having served a mission. And I felt as if I'd missed out on something. And that sounds as if I'm being unappreciative of my situation and being married to the person I love and having a child. But I don't know if that's just I feel as if that's just the way that I was conditioned to be, that I had to serve a mission. I'd prepared for all those years because of my choice. I knew it was because of my choice and because of the choice that Tracy and I had both made that I had put a stop to that plan of going on a mission. And I was happy to be a husband and a father, even though I was so young.
So there's a rite of passage, really, that you didn't get to have. Our friend in the comments, Paul, is actually exactly what I was just about to kind of move on to. What was... We've sort of heard about the leaders and the families, and obviously they've got jobs to do. What about the people in your church community, in your 2 separate faith communities, who it's none of their damn business, but they have got that vested interest in you in your life? They've been invested in you preparing for a mission and all of those things, and Tracy preparing to be a mother and a wife at some point in her life. What did they all make of it? Did you get a sense of judgment?
I'm sure my parents felt a sense of judgment, and I don't know how much gossip there would have been. I was too young to have even realised at the time. Maybe there was gossip. Gossip's a thing that happens in wards, branches, and churches. For me, I just felt those 2 friends that I mentioned earlier, who are lifelong friends, who I consider to be like brothers, they were just completely supportive of me. There was no judgment from them. And I felt as if there was no judgment from a lot of the other youth across the 2 stakes, even though everybody would have found out by that time. And I felt a sense of embarrassment and shame for a long period of time. And I felt nervous about appearing for the first time in public. There was a lot of things that I missed, like going to discos and dances, because I just didn't feel if it was appropriate to go to them just before we get married. So I stayed away from those things. So I felt as if my immediate peers were absolutely fantastic with me, and I think Tracy would say the same about hers as well.
I was a teen convert, and when I was 18, so I'm roughly, I think Tracy would have been maybe pregnant with your second, or maybe had your second child whenever I got pregnant. And the shame of going to church when I had a friend who was saying, no one will judge you, no one's going to judge you, and no one could look me in the eye. And I didn't ever go back to church again. Like, I'm a convert who had all of these issues going on, and no family support, and it was just so horrible. But I remember when I came back to church, and I have my son, you were so kind to me. You were so kind. So yeah, I think it's definitely that experience has to have shaped how you have approached these types of things that you would have been dealing with as a youth leader through your life, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the member of the Glasgow State Presidency, who was the intermediary, who was in between the two families, making sure that the meetings went well and that Tracy and I had a say. I remember at the end of one of those meetings, that person took Tracy and I aside and said, "You need to," sorry. He said, "You need to take the experience that you've had and use it to help others and to be kind to others." Now, he wasn't mean that if there's ever any teenagers in the future who find themselves in the same situation, that you're going to be able to help counsel them. He wasn't meaning that. He was meaning you can gain a lot from this experience, and you should learn from it and use that experience to be a better person. That's what he said to us, and I've never forgotten that. And so when you said that, it reminded me of what he said. And I feel as if the experience, Tracy and I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, why would we? That's what happened, and we made those choices, and we have 7 children, 6 grandchildren now. So
statistically, you guys don't make it. You're members of the church, you're in Scotland, you marry very young, both of you haven't had the education that maybe you would have liked to with hindsight. Your family continues to grow, you're serving in the church, and statistically you guys don't make it. So tell me about what it's like, how you coped with some of those initial hurdles.
Struggled to, I mean, still in the back of my mind, I've got this mission thing going on. But I think one of the ways that we coped with it sounds a bit weird to say this, is we had more children.
Well, that's doing your duty, right?
Yeah. So
multiply and replenish the earth.
Yeah. So we had more children, and we just ended up having a big family. I was 17 when we get married. Eventually, I would get the Melchizedek priesthood, and I would focus on callings and responsibilities that would be given after I became a Melchizedek priesthood holder. So there's all these things going on. I had a part-time job when all of this happened, and that eventually went full-time. I left school, and I focused on just, it wasn't the best job in the world. I ended up being constant night shift in a supermarket, and I wasn't really going anywhere. But I found that I would just focus on being with Tracy and our oldest child, and then having more children, and just working, serving in callings and doing the best that we could to get through life.
So callings, what's that like for you? What kinds of callings did you hold? I'm thinking more of those early years. What kinds of ways were you serving in the church?
Early years, when I moved from 17 to 18 years old, got the Melchizedek priesthood. So the initial callings were, some of these are old callings that I understand are now defunct. So callings like activities committee, assistant activities committee chairperson. So I was involved in trying to organise a calendar of activities and helping to run those activities in the ward. Seminary teacher. I was called as a seminary teacher for a period of time. Eventually things like counsellor in elders quorum or counsellor in Sunday school presidency. So callings like that initially.
I guess I'm asking this because I'm sort of, I am thinking about the you guys that I met, this family that, as I returned to church activity, anything that was happening in the church, especially activities, where you guys were pretty much doing everything. I'm not saying that you were the only people, but I mean, let's face it, there wouldn't have been much going on if you guys weren't there, right? So you're at church late, you're at church early, you're at church for meetings, you're at church for your classes, you're at church for your callings. All of these activities that are constantly happening, baking for things, and that's before we even mention Sunday and sacrament. Tell me about how busyness and church responsibilities affected your family, and then secondly, how it affected you.
Tracy and I talk about all that time we spent planning, running, and taking activities in our ward. Obviously, we weren't the only people involved, but for quite a long period of time, it did feel as if Tracy and I were holding a lot of things together in terms of activities. I don't mean holding the ward together. I just mean in terms of activities. And there was a lot of, we were relied upon, the Hunter family were relied upon to be available for activities, plan things and run things. And it's another case of, if you're good at something, people will always ask you to do it. And so because we were doing these things, it just became natural for people to rely on Tracy and Drew and the family to do these meetings, to do all these activities. So it was, our kids were used to being dragged to church 2 hours before an activity so we could decorate the hall or set up things. We'd already been, as you mentioned, Tracy would be already been baking the hour before that in the house. We'd be up at the church early, run the activity, we'd have other people involved in helping us and things like that. And then after it, the whole hassle, the whole touchy subject of people not staying behind to help, when they probably know that they should know that you've spent hours already planning the activity. They come and they take part in the activity, and then they ditch 1 minute after someone says amen for the closing prayer at the end of the activity. And so that's just what happened. And we were, you mentioned busyness. We got used to busyness because eventually, as the years went on, while we're doing all these things and we have all these responsibilities, Tracy has callings, I have callings. We have 1 child, we have 2 children, we have 3 children, we have 5 children, we have 7 children eventually. And we're still doing all these things. But then I realise, I need to go to college so that I can get into university so that I can do something better with my life. And so I go through university, get myself a degree and a postgraduate diploma in education. With the I wouldn't have done that without Tracy's support. You know, we're a team and we support each other. And so 7 children trying to get through university. Tracy works part-time. I initially had worked part-time, holding all these callings, doing all the other things you're expected to do as a member of the church. Busyness was just a natural part of your life. But now when I look at it, I don't think it's healthy. And the sad thing is, there's a lot of people in the church who see busyness as a badge of honour. The more busy you are, somehow the better you are as a person. People who are not as busy are maybe frowned upon. Well, why are you not as busy as these people over here? But I've learned a lot of lessons since then that the whole idea of being busy is not healthy for society, never mind for families.
Absolutely.
You know, we've always got to be engaged in things and always got to be improving and trying to be a better person or doing better things in our lives. That goes without question, I think. But this obsession with busyness that there is certainly in the church, but in other walks of life as well, I don't think it's anything to be proud of to go about saying that you're dead busy. When people say that to me now, I just think to myself, I'm sorry, but I don't find that impressive. It doesn't impress me.
To answer a question in the comments, so you've moved out into your wife's area, as if they would have let her move out to Paisley. You know, it's a very close family here and in a very tight ward, and you know, I think just to sort of make sure, because this has a global reach. We're in Scotland. We have this tiny ward, which, when there's a family and it's a large family, you are one of the few people in a position to keep it running. So, you know, we have part member families, we have single people, we have people who struggle with addiction, and all of the kind of things that come from being in an area where there maybe isn't a lot of resource, or, you know, that kind of thing put into it. To have active priesthood holders, to have a wife who's dutifully doing all of the, you know, serving and callings and all of the callings, you guys are already spinning plates. Then as the kids come along, you're having to do all of the primary things and support the children there with the practicing, recitals, activities, that kind of thing. As youth comes into it, all of the youth things in addition to what's already happening. And what's really interesting is you raise children who saw possibilities and would see a problem and think, okay, what do we do here with this? Let's maybe approach it this way so, you know, they would maybe be talking about missionary work. Let's have an activity and let's maybe do these things, and that would have this effect. So you had children who had equally all of those responsibilities and busyness too. Tell me about the busyness of your family in general.
Yeah, it was. If I was to speak to, say, my two girls are the oldest, and I have spoken to them since we have all left church. I asked them how they felt as if their life was growing up, and they've told me that they recognised how there was responsibilities and how busy people would be, and they knew that being busy was just a part of the life. So there was no, it was normal for us. We saw it as normal to be that busy, and we felt as if we weren't involving our children in all of these things, that we're not being dutiful Latter-day Saint parents. If we weren't taking them to all the activities, if we were not preparing them, the boys, for example, for getting the Aaronic priesthood, then we were not doing the correct thing by our children as parents. And so, and I always say, whether you've got one child or 7, you're a busy person, because you've got the responsibility of a human being to take care of and raise. But we did have 7, and we wanted them all to have the opportunity. If they wanted to go on a mission, we were mainly focused on the boys for that. But for the girls, I suppose that would have been an option for them as well, but you're not really thinking the same way for the girls going on missions. So we are busy as a family, but Tracy and I still feel today that we were doing the right things for our children, because that's all we knew. Because Tracy and I were raised the same way, and we just raised our children the way that we were raised, and that was being busy and trying to prepare them for each and every milestone that they were going to reach in their Mormon life.
I guess what I'm kind of thinking about here is that we've got this young man, this young boy who's raised in the church, who is receiving the best, possible Mormon support and upbringing. Obviously, when there's tension with the lived experience, you're coping with all of that. You're doing really, really well, and you are building this life. with more and more and more responsibility being placed on your shoulder, more and more things to do. And at any point, you could say no, but you don't for a lot of years. And I guess what I'm getting at is these are really high stakes things that you are teaching your children. It's while it's preparing them for Mormon life, it's ultimately you're preparing them for exaltation. You're preparing them. You want your family to be forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point. Tell me how the lived experience of church. I guess I want to make a parallel with you're receiving an education, you're studying in university, and maybe for the first time you're getting introduced to ideas that are exciting and new, and you're being taught to think and to think critically. Yeah, first of all, tell me about why you decided to go get more education. And then, if it's okay, could you maybe tie that into how did that affect what you were learning at church?
Okay. Well, it's easy for me to tell this because I can pinpoint the time period when I made the decision. So I don't have really any qualifications to my name once I'd left school because I didn't focus on those qualifications. I got some O grades before there was ever standard grades. I don't know if anyone that means anyone outside of Scotland, but I didn't get any of what would be considered, I suppose, an English system GCSEs. I didn't have any hires or anything like that. So I really had to do something. And the interesting thing was there is this, you see and you know when you're immersed in the church that the people who are have leaders who have big responsibilities, such as bishops, but I suppose when we get into stake presidency level and area authority, 70s, or mission presidents, right up to general authorities, these are men who are highly professional. The vast majority of them, if not all of them, have went to university and got at least a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, or more. And so I am looking at these men thinking, these are the people that I've got up on a pedestal. Here is Drew Hunter without a qualification to his name. I don't really consider myself to be the kind of LDS man that I should be because I need to be like these men. And so I was given the calling of Sunday school teacher for the adults. I actually spent most of my leadership years with youth anyway, and I loved my years working with the youth in the church. Those were my favourite callings. But I was called as the adult Sunday school teacher. And that helped me to realise that I was able to actually teach in a way that was effective. I could communicate ideas and encourage thinking and construct good questions to encourage discussion. And so I went through all the usual processes of praying about it and fasting about it, reading background information on what you should do to get an education. And then I realised, I could actually get to university because I could do an access course at college. So I applied to a local college, got in, did a full year access course of humanities, and absolutely was blown away by it, doing politics, sociology, psychology, a little bit of philosophy as well. So that was just a taster of it. And then I knew I could apply for university. Initially, I went for primary education and didn't get in because it's such a difficult postgraduate, difficult degree to get into. You could have the best results and still not get in. It's just a bit of its luck. So that kind of changed, and I just decided to go for a general humanities degree that would eventually specialise in history with politics as well. And so I went through what was 5 years of study. So I had to have the 1 year of college and the 4 years, including the the honours year for the bachelor's degree. Came out of education thinking, well, I'm going to be blessed with a job now because I've done what Heavenly Father has asked me to, and just hit a brick wall. Couldn't find anyone that would employ me. What do you do with a history degree? I suppose there's certain things you can do, but I lacked experience. And so just because of a fortunate sequence of events, I was able to apply for secondary education postgraduate diploma and study at Jordan Hill, and then became a qualified history teacher. And so that was my journey in getting educated, with my focus being I wanted to be someone who could provide for their family, but have a profession where I had a job that was stable and was exhilarating for me, and I was doing something good as well for people. I can't imagine. I would never see myself being a businessman, or certainly not being a lawyer or anything like that, or a politician. I'd rather do something on the coalface, which I think personally is giving back in the right kind of way. So that's why I chose education. But behind it all is me thinking, well, I need to be like these general authorities or these state presidents or these mission presidents, because maybe that's going to be me in the future. Tracy and I will go and serve a mission, and I'll be a mission president with Tracy by my side, or we'll serve a temple mission or something like that. You're just projecting ahead all the time.
Yeah.
All these things that you could possibly be, these responsibilities you might have. So,
I have so many questions that are going through my mind right now, but I think this is an important one. Why history? Why humanities? What was the draw?
I think from a young age, probably from around about the time that Tracy and I get married, I just became very interested in human societies, why human beings behave the way that they do individually, but also in collective groups. Now, history is one of the best ways to track that. And, you can look at cycles of history and see how human societies have grown and developed, and how people behave in those societies, power structure and various other things. So that was an attraction to me. I like to try and understand why people act the way they do, and why large groups act the way they do. And so, and history for me was just, ultimately, history is just a fantastic subject because it's just fascinating anyway. I always tell pupils this when I see them for the first time when I get a new class. My least favourite subject at high school was history, and that was because of the way that it was taught. It was taught very badly. Maybe that was just the experience of us in our school in Paisley, but it wasn't taught well. History lessons were very boring and very dry and uninteresting. And so it wasn't until I came out of school, after I got married, and I was doing more own reading, that actually I started to appreciate it.
So it's a subject that you love. That's what I'm excited for people to be able to follow their passion. So this, to make a sacrifice, to be able to, ultimately you're trying to get to be the kind of Mormon, the kind of father, the kind of leader that you're seeing reflected, but you're also getting to follow your what really means a lot to you. Let's quickly ask then, what kind of callings are happening in this sort of stage of life then? So you're serving where? You're now bishoprics?
I've been called to bishoprics. I was in a bishopric, and then I was my first bishopric calling, and then I was called straight into the High Council in the stake as well. And then out of the High Council back into another bishopric calling.
Yeah, I remember, and I think those were times when So, the whole ward could see that our ward wasn't doing that great. Our ward was struggling in a lot of ways, and you were sort of seen as someone who was needed to be in different places. That was apparent to everyone. I'm gonna sort of almost circle back a little bit to ask about your temple experience. So you and Tracy were sealed in the temple. Could you talk about how soon you guys were able to be sealed? What was your initial experience of what were your initial thoughts about your temple experience? And how would then going to the temple at this stage in your life, where you are super busy keeping the church going in a lot of ways, and I know that you don't like me saying things like that. I know that that's not how you feel, but this is how I was certainly perceiving it. Alana, I know that you would agree. They were needed. They were the heart of the ward, right? Tell me how your processing of the temple changes from that first experience, how it evolves.
We were married February 1992, and we had to wait a year to be sealed in the temple. At that point, there wasn't a temple in Preston. The only temple in the United Kingdom was in London. And so we waited a year after we were married, and we went with Amber, our little tiny tot baby, and travelled with Tracy's mum and dad to the London temple. I didn't drive at that time, so we had to use public transport. It was a nightmare.
Wow.
Taking Amber all the way down there at that age. And we went into the temple, received our initiatories and then our endowments, and it was all very quick. And then we get sealed together, and we just accepted it because we're LDS, and we want to be exalted. We want to get into the highest degree of the celestial kingdom, be there with each other and their children. And so we go ahead and do that. And I didn't really give it a lot of thought what we were actually doing, because I automatically just assumed that it was the right thing to do because that's what I'd been taught. So it wasn't until years later that I started to. Obviously, there was a temple built in Preston a few years later, and we would go there semi-regularly for temple trips. But obviously, we've got a growing family, so it tended not to be that Tracy would go away on a temple trip and I would stay at home, or that I would go away on a temple trip. We just somehow managed to arrange babysitters for a short period of time and managed to both go at the same time. So I'm assuming we relied upon Tracy's family very heavily in those time periods.
I can't see what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I was a babysitter.
Yeah. So we would have relied on Alana and other family members. And so we would go down to the temple. And we were just going through the motions. We were just doing what we felt was the right thing to do. I felt as if the ceremonies that take place at the temple were important, because I was taught those are the most important ceremonies that LDS people go through. And so I just accepted that it had to be done, even though I couldn't understand a lot of it. But these are the mystical, mysterious things that we're told that we can have. We can see those things and understand those things if we have spiritual eyes and if we keep going back. I remember temples are always compared to universities. My view on that has changed very much. I don't see temples, LDS temples, as being like universities. They're two very separate things for very important reasons. So yeah, we just went through the motions of going to temple. Tracy talks about it now and thinks, wow, that was just weird. That was just mental, the whole ceremony.
I remember coming back to church, and you were one of the people who would thoughtfully be a book donor. Like, I was reading everything. You were very well versed in your Mormonism. tell me, while you're learning, while you're embarking in this new stage in your life, and you are, I mean, you're right in at the guts of the doctrine. What starts to happen? Tell me about your Mormon journey as you start to think more critically.
Right now, I am still receiving. Bear with me when I start talking. This sounds as if I'm not answering your question, but bear with me. Right now, I am in the middle of receiving counselling. Okay. And as part of that counselling, I am being told and reminded constantly that one of the biggest concerns I have as a person is a sense of justice. I feel a strong sense of justice in the world. And so because I have this strong sense of justice, when I see something done that is unfair to people, then I feel as if I have to speak up, get involved, and try to understand, as I said earlier, I try to understand societies. I try to understand why people behave the way they do. And so when I see an injustice being done, I get involved. I speak up, and I can't help myself. I have to speak up when I see an injustice done. And so what I was seeing was injustices being done to people who I knew who were in the church. And eventually those injustices came very close to me because the injustices were being suffered by my own children. And the interesting thing is, I had, like a lot of members of the church and a lot of people of other religious organizations, I have a shelf where questions are kept, and those questions sometimes get taken off the shelf and put in the forefront of my mind, and I think more about those questions. Quite often they're doctrinal questions, theological questions about the church, sometimes historical questions about the church. Now, you can separate those from the injustices that are taking place, because the injustices are the way that people are treated in the church. But in a lot of ways, they're closely linked together, because a part of the reason the injustices take place is because we have principles and policies that are, and I use inverted commas, revealed to the leaders of the church that have a direct effect upon the members of the church. And I mentioned this in the video that I had made. There is this, I believe, myth of the LDS church being perfect, and that is drummed into you, that it's the only true church. It's Jesus Christ's church. It bears his name, and it's the one that was proclaimed to Joseph Smith to be the one that he would restore. And so if that's the one true church, why is the one true church responsible for certain things taking place where harm is caused, where large groups of people experience psychological trauma, abuse, and are treated in a way that only, I would think, a monolithic, unfeeling bureaucratic organization would treat people? I work in the public sector, and I see firsthand sometimes in certain aspects of the public sector, I'm not talking about education, so to speak, but in other aspects of the public sector where bureaucracy just tears away at people's lives. There's the intimacy, the value of people, individuals, is not there. And I see the value of individual people not being taken care of for everyone, because there are marginalized groups in the LDS church. And sometimes those marginalized groups are some of the people who are trying their hardest to live the gospel and to do the things that are being asked of them, and it's never enough. And so there is this side of me that intellectually sees this church that has all this theological background and this foundation of apostles and prophets, and then the keystone of the Book of Mormon and the priesthood and all these things. The reality is, because it's a worldwide church, the way that it's run in such a way that people are treated like numbers rather than people. And I know I'm generalizing in a lot of the statements that I'm making, and I suppose in my experience with my own children, it's anecdotal, but you can't disagree with my children's experience or my experience. It's what I've lived. It's what my children have lived. It's the way they've been treated. It wasn't some other organisation that treated them that way. It was the church.
See, I think that's something that I struggle with a lot is, like people say, but that didn't happen to me, that I've never heard of that happening, as if they're trying to say that doesn't happen in the church. Like I hear stories of that all the time. And I think people need to wake up a bit more to realise that just because it didn't happen to them or just because they've never seen it doesn't mean it's not happening. And I think people need to be more aware of that within the church, that they need to realise that these things do happen. You might not see it. I've almost heard people who've said that basically people are trying to say that doesn't happen in our church, that kind of thing doesn't happen. But I think in their minds, I don't know, I can't speak for other people and what they feel, but I sometimes feel like they just don't want to believe it. Like, because Jane, you're a kind of example of that, because things I've told Jane in the past, and she tried, not that she tried to defend it in such a way, but she just, I think deep down, she thinks that can't happen in my church, and she never like puts me 100%. Down and says that didn't happen, but she struggles with that and sometimes pushes back a little bit on it, and I'm like, no, it seriously does. I know you don't want to believe it. Well, it's hurtful to people when they feel like they're not validated in what they're saying because people want to believe that it's not happening, but it hasn't happened.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that, Alana, because this is actually, I've got a couple of big questions that, well, for me, they're big questions that I've actually wanted to ask Drew for a really long time. So I'm quite excited to do this right now. When you or Alana are speaking, when Alana's having a conversation with me, and Alana will frequently be talking about church and be projecting ahead to, but they will say A, B, or C. And I'll be sort of saying, well, who'll be saying, who are these people that you think will be saying this? And okay, so these are people that know you, that love you, and maybe one or two people, but what are their names? Who would be, that is it maybe that you are, maybe that you're overthinking, maybe that you're bringing your shame along with it, that you could let go of that shame. Is it maybe you're projecting? Church members, they're on your side. There are all of these times when they've been there for part of your journey, and all they do is want the very best for you, and they're your cheerleaders. And I was really struck again by a lot of people will say that, and I am very clear on, I have got no idea what what has led you guys to think that. And occasionally Alana will say something and I realize, oh, that's why that's why she thinks the way she does, because it's actually true, and it's this horrific realization. Well, Drew, in your podcast, I really took note of the amount of times that you would, from the outset, talk about how it would be received by people who were in the church or by people who were leaders in the church. And I had that sense again of, I have got no idea what it's like to be raised in the church and to get insights into what people are thinking. I sort of tend to take it at face value. And I think part of the reason for that is because the people at church that I would see that were my peer and my support were you guys, like my friends who are all non-judgmental and things, but you guys have had to interact in completely different ways through your life. So could you maybe speak a little bit to that hadn't been my reality until I was able to sort of hear that, okay, why are you guys thinking all the time about how people are going to take what you're saying?
Well, that feeds into what my second episode is going to be in the next few days, which is how how Mormons, active Mormons, and ex-Mormons, or people who are going through a faith transition from Mormonism, how they can better communicate with each other. Because one of the saddest things that takes place when a family member, when an individual has doubts, and legitimate doubts, I must say, and they're allowed to question those doubts, when they're going through that, one of the biggest tragedies is the fact that it completely divides and splits up families. If there's a part member family, for example, or if it's a couple where both are fully invested in the church, they have a family, and then one of those people in the marriage starts to drift away, but not drift away in the sense that they're being lost like lost sheep, as if there's some pathetic woolly mammal that can't look after itself. But I mean, someone who's rationally thinking things through and has maybe been a victim of mistreatment. That can cause division, so much so that it causes divorce, it causes splits between couples. And it's a very sensitive topic. It's a very traumatic situation to be in. And what I want to do is, and that's why I was saying those things in the episode that I put out, is my experience is that because the LDS Church, the Mormon Church, is, as far as I'm concerned, acts like and has all the hallmarks of a cult, then there is a lot of undue influence placed upon the members. And so because of that, because of the way that church members are, if you're raised in it or you've spent many years as a member of the church, you are in a bubble, and there is this exceptionalism because it's the only true church, and that stems from the American exceptionalism as well, the country that it originates in, and that it's the only true church, and you can't question it. The prophets are right when they speak, and you have a very risky, dangerous, damaging organization that doesn't allow for questioning or for rational thought, as far as I'm concerned, from what I can see. And so what you have is, you have people, and I'm not trying to describe every single member of the church, because they're not all like this. But generally speaking, sometimes it's very difficult for people to be able to understand what someone is going through if you think that they are misled, or they are sinners, or they are disobedient, or they're unrighteous. And these are all the little tropes that are fed to you when someone is going through a difficult time in the church. And so you have all these people who I think are well-intentioned, who come and try and love bomb you to try and get you to come back, when the reality is that's not what the person needs. The person needs just genuine time on their own, genuine care and attention, and to be listened to. There are too many people who just want to preach and preach and preach to people who are going through a faith transition. That is not what a person needs when they're going through a faith transition. They need to be listened to, and as Alana said earlier, they need to be validated. Only last week or the week before, my oldest daughter Amber put up a post, I think it was on Facebook and Instagram, I can't remember, it was on social media anyway, and she opened herself up and explained her experience as a member of the church and how it affected her. And it didn't take long for someone who is, I think, still an active member of the church to come out and be critical of what she had said. Now, I'm not getting the huckles up. I don't feel angry about it. I'm past all that, getting angry and annoyed. I don't have bitterness, but what I do have is that sense of injustice. And I think to myself, you cannot, whether you are a Mormon or an ex-Mormon, you cannot harshly judge the other person you're communicating with, because not in the same space as them. You're not going through what they've went through. And so that's why I think it's important for Mormons, transitioning Mormons and ex-Mormons, to try and communicate a little bit better and be a little bit more empathetic and compassionate towards each other. You don't have to agree. We don't have to agree on facts or doctrine or theology. You can argue until the cows come home, all that stuff. But you can't disagree with and argue about someone's personal lived experience. It's I think it's very immature emotionally and socially to judge a person that way and to treat them that way, and it does not help. It will never ever help.
I think
If you're an ex-Mormon, and I say this in the video as well, if you're an ex-Mormon and you've left and you're no longer a member of the church, it's very easy to look at members of the church and say, look at those nutcases still in there doing all these crazy things. And Tracy and I talk about these things all the time and say, well, several years ago I was doing that, and several years ago I would have looked at non-members or ex-members and judged them and thought, you need to be part of us. You need to be saved like us. You need to get your exaltation and receive the gospel and do the things that we're doing. And we wouldn't understand why they didn't accept it. But that's because we live in this bubble of LDS Mormon theology, and we're raised that way, certainly for those who are brought up in the church. And so one of the things that Alana had referred to as well, see when people judge other people's experience based on their own, or because it's not happened to them, that's a real serious logical fallacy that's been committed there. It's called the exception fallacy. And what it is, the best way to put it is this. If I remember watching a TV program, it was a chat show, and the theme of the show was there was crime being committed in this town in England. And so the person who was hosting the show would walk around and just ask people to give their opinion and things that had happened to them. And the host went to this woman who said, there can't be crime in our community because I've never been broken into. And I remember sitting watching the TV thinking, is she stupid? That she's basing other people's experiences on the fact that she hasn't experienced a criminal act in the town that she lives. We need to come out of our heads, our hearts, our bubbles, and try and walk in the shoes of other people, or at least try to think what it would be like to walk in the shoes of other people before we even begin to think that we can judge them. And so that's why my feelings and thoughts on leaving the church has got to be about trying to bring people together to have compassionate, empathetic discussions, and not start fighting and arguing over doctrine or theology or whether someone's saved or damned. We need to try and understand each other more, and that's the purpose behind what I'm trying to do.
See, I think as well, like I've often said this over the last few years, especially over the last few months, I've said this to Jane, I feel like within the church, friendships within the church are purely based on whether you're an active member of the church, and that's sad. And I'm not saying that's the case with every member in the church, because there are people, within the church who still reach out to me, and not about preaching and things like that. I know with my parents and things, there's another person who's still friends, but I feel like loads of people, it's like, if you're not active in the church, we can't be friends. And that's sad, because we're all about being the one true church, Christ church, but yet we don't behave in a manner which reflects that.
Yeah.
I think also one of the things that I always find myself wanting to defend church members on this, kind of thing, and I don't know why I keep doing it. I think I'm just, because I know they don't intend to do this or behave like this, but it's just the effect that ends up happening. I don't think anybody genuinely thinks, oh, you've left the church, well, that's it. But I mean, clearly it happens. When we look at examples like, you know, your daughter's post about leaving the church, people are reading it feeling genuinely threatened by your experience. They are really struggling to they cannot take it on board, because to consider that being a valid and real experience, it would require them to empathize, which would require them to listen, which would require them to have a better understanding of exactly what you're talking about, exactly what Amber's talking about. So it's much, much easier to double down and to bear your testimony. I want to ask you, you know, you mentioned love bombing. We've never mentioned that on the show. What is the deal with love bombing?
Well, within psychological studies on cult control, and not just cult control, but a lot of religious organizations or totalitarian organizations where authority is exercised in a manner that people can't exercise their undue influence. There's a lot of situations where people look out for the vulnerabilities in people. When missionaries serve missions, they are taught in the missionary training centre to look for ways to build relationships of trust with people who are potentially investigators of the church. They're looking for leads, so to speak, from active members of potential investigators that they could bring in as well. And I know that you can't get people to agree with you or join an organization unless you show an element of concern or care towards them. So that's, you know, there has to be care and concern towards a person, but it has to be genuine care and concern. It shouldn't be based on whether or not you choose to be baptized and join the church. And love bombing is a way of it's a psychological manipulation tool that's used certainly by more of the extreme cults, but also by the LDS Church, and trying to be aware of the vulnerabilities of a couple or an individual who the missionaries happen to be in contact with, and have a conversation and say, look, we eternal families, and we've got this, and you can come here and you can have activities and you can socialize with us and blah, blah, blah. And those are all great things. But in reality, it's all to do with numbers. It's all to do with having more members join the church. And so the leadership of the church would say, well, that's just because we want people to receive the love of Christ and have exaltation and get into the highest degree of the celestial kingdom with their families, and we can all be together. But it's essentially just in the first place just to get the numbers up. It's just to get people to join the church. There is a culture in missions, because I know that because of the experience of my own son, who's been on speaking to you before. There is a culture on missions of statistics and numbers, and you have to reach figures and Alana's served a mission. And so there is this culture where it's like business targets. You've got to reach this many targets or these many numbers by the end of the month. If not, you're shamed. You're not as good as this companionship or this zone or this district. And that all feeds into this whole idea of love bombing, because love bombing is not a genuine kind of love. It's not unconditional. Unconditional love is you just care for your fellow human beings, and you just act in an altruistic manner towards them. And so love bombing is more of a tool used to increase membership and get people to convert to your way of thinking.
It can be easier to see love bombing when you have a step back and it's something happening to someone else. It can be easier to observe because when you are when you're the person who's on the receiving end of love bombing, it feels really good. It can be very difficult to recognize because you're being made to feel really good. And I've sort of one of my interests is looking at narcissistic family structures, and in a lot of ways, we can see some of those types of unhealthy behaviours play out in a church. Looking at it as a sort of family context, a sort of different example of a family, but similar nonetheless. And I remember having a conversation with you where you just couldn't do it anymore. You had taken your family to an activity and you thought, I'm just going to sit out in the car and get into the zone. And of course, I had to come and burst your bubble and, you will talk to me. And we had a lovely chat in the car. It was really nice, I think. But I got to see someone, I'm telling you, it was really nice. You must have enjoyed it because I was there. But I got to witness someone who I would say loves you, coming over to the car to have a, quick, remember how much I love you kind of conversation. And your response to it was heartbreaking. I remember you saying, if only that was true, when they walked away. And I think the thing with love bombing is that when people, especially when people join the church, I think it's really quite easy to see. We can have this, it can be manufactured or it can be very natural, but we have this experience of feeling loved, accepted. This is home. This is an extension of my family. This is where I fit in. This is where I belong. And we want everybody to have that experience, right? But the problem is with love bombing is when members are doing it almost as a duty that, they're having to go round each person and it's a performance and that they don't necessarily even know really that they're doing, but, with a little bit of, if they dig down, I'm sure they could. But the whole point of it is that you spend the rest of your life, whether it's in a family or whether it's in a church organization or wherever, that you are constantly, it puts the receiver in the position of constantly having to try to chase that feeling of being wanted and loved and accepted. And the problem is that it was never real. And that's something that I really struggle with, because I want to believe that that was a real thing, that person really, really meant that or really felt that. Tell me something about something that you said in your podcast. Okay. You, as a history teacher, present different options to your children to help them, to your pupils, to help them think critically. And I was surprised to hear you say with certainty, the church is a cult. And you were very clear on that, the church is a cult. You didn't suggest the church could be looked at as a cult, or that one particular model for looking at the churches, it could be, you were pretty confident in that, and it surprised me because I haven't really heard you make those kinds of statements before. This is what that is.
Yeah.
Tell me what brought you to, I know you've mentioned cult-like thinking a little bit, but could you tell me what brought you to that point where you can say the church is a cult?
Yeah, and can I say at this point as well that if there were any active members of the church who watched this podcast, in particular this episode, they would, they might feel upset or annoyed or threatened. I don't know, maybe I'm not a threatening person, I'm not in the least bit bothered by anything that I say, but me making that judgment that the Mormon Church is a cult is a personal judgment that I made based on everything that I have learned and studied about tyrannical organisations, or the way that power is used and manipulated in organisations, or in group conformity behaviour and all those kind of things. I remember teaching higher psychology at school to a group of pupils, and we had a brand new textbook out that year for higher psychology, and contained in the group psychology section of that textbook was Stephen Hassan's BITE model for cult organizations, and how to identify them, and how to also not so much identify the organization, but to identify whether or not you have been part of it, and how you can recognize how you have been controlled or manipulated by it. And so Stephen Hassan, I would encourage anyone and I always encourage people to read and keep reading, and read as many books as possible about a variety of subjects, so that you can learn as many things as you can. If you read Stephen Hassan's BITE model, you can just type it into Google. The man is not a fake. He's not some sort of pseudoscientist. He's a qualified psychologist. He was a member of the Mooney Church, the Unification Church. He was part of a cult. He experienced it, so he wears the T-shirt, so to speak. And he had learned from being in and then being out, which is my experience, being in and then being out and looking in the way, to be able to understand how organizations like this function. So Stephen Hassan's BITE model is based on other research and studies that have been done before him, because that's generally how knowledge in society builds up. And so he just builds on that knowledge of organizations, especially organizations that exercise authoritarian control over people. And if you look at the BITE model, BITE stands for behavior. So BITE stands for behavior. I'm just looking at it just now because I always get them mixed up. Information control, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And then if you look at those 4 parts of his model, it further divides them into other subcategories that explain different ways that these organizations will control the people who are members of them. And although the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints doesn't come at the more extreme end of the scale for a cult, it certainly sits somewhere in the middle or to the right of that scale. It's significantly controlling organization, and the BITE model the way that the BITE model describes these organizations fits very, very cleanly into the way that the Mormon Church operates, and how it interacts with its members, how it treats its members, what its expectations of members are with regards to questioning, critical thinking, further reading, having doubts, and how to deal with those doubts, how you regulate your emotion, how you're manipulated and gaslighted into being guilty if you do certain things. And those are all manipulative forms of control. And whether members of the church accept it or not, that's entirely up to them. I'm not here to convince people that the LDS Church is a cult. I'm just here to tell people that from what I have learned, the LDS Church fits into the model of being a classical cult.
We have loads, about 50% of our audience are active Mormon, progressive, whatever type, but are engaged Mormons. And that question, I feel like a lot of times what church members, you're right, a lot of church members, that might be so difficult to have even entertained, that's where you stop listening. And I'm really hopeful that people, have, and they have been listening, but I'm hopeful that people in general can keep listening, because one of the things that people are often looking for me to do is to clarify what I'm thinking. So we in this podcast speak to this really exciting, beautiful, growing tension of, someone who's engaged, someone who's taking a step back, and today someone who's completely, dissociated with the church. It's a great conversation to have. And you don't need to all agree on what's happening, but you can give yourself the space to feel uncomfortable with the question and sort of, ask yourself, what is it about that question, that idea that's making you uncomfortable? What is it that, where are you feeling that in your body? What is going on with you that's a really offensive thing that you couldn't hear someone explain? Okay, this is what a cult is, and this fits the criteria, and so yes, I believe. Therefore, we can fall on different sides of that, and it's okay. Alana, church or cult? What would you say?
So, well, obviously, like, I remember speaking to you about that a while back, as someone else in my family had said about it being a cult, and I remember you saying that you didn't agree with that, and like you're saying, that it's fine that we can all agree to disagree, kind of thing. I can't at this point 100% say that I agree it's a cult, because I feel it would be wrong of me to say that, because I haven't done enough research to be able to state that. I would say they, in my opinion, they have very cultish behaviours.
Oh my goodness.
I personally wouldn't hands-on say 100% I could say yes to that question, because I haven't done enough of my own research. I keep saying I'm going to look at the bite model, I haven't yet, but I do see specific behaviours that I would say are very cultish rather than it being a cult. But ask me again maybe in a month or two and I might be able to answer it then.
Well, I have looked at the bite model. I see, this is exactly what we need, and Mormonism, that is healthy. I don't know enough about that thing. I can reserve judgment, but I don't want to have an emotional reaction and say yes or say absolutely not my church.
Jane, can I just say
that, please do.
Ironically, in the church, it's not healthy to do that. Considering the conversation we're having about a controlling organisation being, it being a cult, if church leaders knew that active members were looking into these things, those church members might be called into the bishop's office and told that they shouldn't be reading those things because they're anti-Mormon. And so that is another indicator of a cult under the description of Stephen Hassan's bite model. And I could never, ever convince anyone, and I'm not out, as I said earlier, I'm not out to convince anyone of something. People need to arrive at these conclusions themselves. It's just that I have reached those conclusions based on the information that I've read and researched.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, it falls under that category.
Well, that's the thing. It would be very easy for me to agree with you and say, well, Drew's researched it, so I'll 100% say I agree with Drew.
You shouldn't
do that, because I have to come to my own conclusions of that.
Yeah.
And what actually I really like is that where you're sitting right now, Alana, with don't know. I've looked at it, but that space that you're in of there's cult-like traits there. Absolutely, it would absolutely sound like it all fits. I 100% can sit here and say I'm an active, engaged Mormon, but our church is hella culty. Oh my goodness, there's a lot to unpack there. And I refuse to believe, what you're mentioning, if anybody were to counsel with their bishop about that or say it out loud at church. I don't believe there is one single member of the church who has not thought, are we a cult? Because we're so niche, we are so tiny, it's got to have crossed your mind. But if we just don't say it out loud, it will make it not true. It's okay to talk about what you're thinking, people. Okay. Drew, tell me then, and I'm really aware that we're keeping you here talking about all these fascinating things. I could just keep
That's
going
fine.
all night, but I want to know more about what the hell happened.
Ultimately,
I guess to answer the question that a lot of members of the church would have, who look at someone who they will, and I'm actually paraphrasing, this is the kind of thing that is said, look, he was so strong in the church for all these years, I didn't ever think this would happen.
I will openly admit that is something I've said, pretty much those words about Drew and my sister. I was shocked when they left the church, shocked, because they were so all in, so invested in everything, you know, and I honestly said I never thought I'd see the day where Drew Hunter and Tracy Hunter would leave the church.
And that's
I never thought that. I never thought I'd see the day as well.
Right. But I do remember a couple of what for me, and seeing you, were kind of pivotal moments. Your family went through, I don't know, what are we going to go back, maybe at least 10 years? Your family, I want to say, went through a period of sustained, just out and out, the worst possible things that could happen in your family. You guys had it coming from all angles. And I'm laughing as I say went through, because it seems to have just never let up since then. You guys have been through and are going through so much. And now I remember when I broke, it felt like I had snapped into a million pieces. And there is Drew giving the talk of a lifetime that I can honestly say is one of the things that at that time saved my life. I can honestly say it. Now, it wasn't so much to do with the doctrines of the church, but it was to do with having faith in what I was having faith in. And it was, being the person who's there for me at that time when I'm really struggling. I feel like I have a vested interest in your well-being. Therefore, you know, that's what we do. We look out for each other. And I remember sort of chuckling to you one day, as in fact, the first thing that happened was you keep a lid on pretty much everything. You're a listener. You observe what's happening, and you do that in meetings too. You observe what's happening, and then you think about it, consider it, and so your responses are always so well measured. And if we were ever talking about things, it would be how people are living their experiences. And one day, as I'm going into church, and I can't remember what it was specifically we were talking about, but you just suddenly said, "Do you know some people believe the Book of Mormon was an actual historical record? Can you believe that?" And I just remember thinking, Drew's in this space. This is great. And, you know, so the other thing that happened was it was just something similar, and it's, I'll probably come back to it, but just one of those moments of, I had asked, how can you be a history teacher and handle Sunday school? And you were like, well, here I am. And yeah, it was just becoming more and more apparent to me that things were really tough, and that not only you've got all of this going on in your family, but the place where you would have once went for comfort maybe wasn't having that effect. And people have all sorts of assumptions whenever someone leaves church about why that's the case. So you clearly stopped reading your scriptures, and you clearly stopped praying. You clearly aligned yourself with values that were on the liberal side. We'll you know, just say it, LGBTQ support, things like that. People have all of these assumptions. So I guess what I'm asking is, what was happening for you then?
Well, to address the point you made about being a history teacher and being able to be a Sunday school teacher at the same time, those two do seem to be very opposite things. And they are, because we know that the history of the church is very, very far away from what should be objective reality in terms of having all the information. I'm a great believer as a historian that you have to have all of the information available to you so that you can reach conclusions and make decisions about whatever it is you're studying in the past. Otherwise, there is an agenda there. And whenever there's an agenda in history, that's when bad things happen to people. And so we need to prevent bad things from happening to people in society. And one of the ways we do that is we allow people to know all the bad things that happened, as well as all the lovely good things that happened. If we whitewash history, we never ever learn from it. And so this is what I always try to put across to people, whether it be in the classroom with the pupils or what I tried to do to a certain extent at church. And so I was finding myself in situations where I was being obedient, Tracy was being obedient, we were trying to be the best family we possibly could. But for some reason, the church that was meant to nurture us kept kicking us to the ground. And while we were on the ground, just getting a few boots into us. And I'm sorry, but that is not, I don't see that as the same as the story of Job. I personally don't think, based on what I was taught, that Christ's church should be the source of your trauma and be the source of your heartache. We were always taught that it's the place where you go for respite and rest. The church is the place of rest, the place that's your place of safety, whether that be physical or emotional or psychological safety, and it was not doing those things. We did not feel safe. Our children were being mistreated and did not feel safe. Now, I'm not saying that our children were going in to have interviews with leaders of the church and terrible things were being done to them. What I would say is that because leaders of the church were not qualified to say and do the things that they were doing, those things should not have happened. Hence the reason we have these campaigns that happen now, where we are trying to make it so that leaders in the church who are more directly responsible for youth or children have checks done and are able to have some sort of competency when it comes to handling situations that they can deal with, but allowing the parents to do the rest, because that's the parents' job. But as I say, we're finding ourselves in situations where, for us, it was things like when Logan came out to us, as I mentioned in the video.
And Logan's your middle child, right?
Logan's a middle child, and when he came out to us, we embraced him and we showed him how much we loved him immediately from the moment that he spoke to us.
Is it okay? Forgive me, Drew. I just want to make sure that I'm getting this right, and I'm really sorry if this is crossing the line. But I feel it's important for us to be doing anyways as people. But can I just check what pronouns are we using for Logan? Would that be okay?
Yeah, they.
That's awesome. Thank you.
And again, for us, it's a more recent thing because we're getting used to not calling Logan, but calling him M. But I still revert back to this. It's a whole journey for it's a whole journey for an entire family.
Yeah, it takes practice. Yeah,
it does. For our family at that time, that was not the case. It was still Logan, and we realised that he had experienced a lot of things with church leaders and growing up in the church that completely and utterly devastated him and made life so difficult for him growing up in ways that we actually can't fathom or understand, and we never will. But we are aware that that's how he felt. We are aware of the fact that he went through all of this now. There's also the situation with Ben, who you had on your show, who had served a mission. And all I'll say is, when he was on his mission, and when I say in the video that we felt as if he was being held against his will or our will while he was there going through a mental health crisis, that's exactly how it felt. We should have been consulted more closely. He was not being properly taken care of. I can say that without any fear of a mistake, that Ben and other missionaries on that mission at the time, and I know the culture on missions remains the same, that there are serious issues with regards to taking proper care of young people on missions. And so his experience was horrendous, him being somewhere else in the world and Tracy and I literally not able to do anything. So we've got all that going on as well. So in the midst of all of these things going on, I have those questions on the shelf that sometimes get taken off the shelf and I look at them. I am already drifting away. Then it comes to the time where my girls are getting married. They found their husbands and the men that they fell in love with and they were getting married. And I know that I need to go to the temple. Tracy and I want to go to the temple to see our oldest daughter being sealed in the temple to her husband. I had the single most horrendous experience with a church leader at that time and trying to get a temple recommend, where I was grilled to within an inch of my life, with questions being asked about my tithe payments, the suggestion being that I wasn't a full tithe payer, and judgments being made about my income. The stake leader who was interviewing me had tried to, I think, research the grade that I was on as a teacher so that he could determine what my salary was at that time. And then from the information that he thought he had found out, he could make the judgment. I suppose he thought that was a gift of discernment, and make a decision about whether or not I was a full tithe payer. Now, the psychology of all this, if you're not a member of the church, you could never understand this. The psychology that's at play here is extremely complex and powerful. I want to be in the temple to see my daughter being sealed to her husband more than anything. It's important to an LDS family for that to happen. And so I want that temple recommend. I need that temple recommend. And I felt as if in that meeting I just grovelled and grovelled for a piece of paper to allow me to get into the temple. And we had also been told that we had to pay instalments of tithing that we owed. And so we ended up having to pay instalments of previous tithing that had to be owed as well.
Can I just let's just clarify a couple of things, because also I'm aware that there will be a lot of non-members listening too. How is that supposed to go? I assume that you've walked into that office a full tithe payer. Your declarations up until that point, you pay your tithing. You've had a temple recommend you're going to get it renewed for your child. Your bishop has signed their part.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about how it's supposed to be?
So the bishop who is your immediate local leader would have that interview with you so you can get a temple recommend that allows you to get into one of the LDS temples to see a temple sealing take place, which is a married couple being brought together to be married for time and all eternity, which is a very big deal in Mormon families, because it essentially is you being sealed together to live forever in the celestial kingdom, which is the Mormon version of heaven. And so it's a big deal. And then you always have another temple recommend meeting with a member of the state presidency who countersigns that temple recommend piece of paper that allows you to get into the temple. When I had that meeting with the member of the state presidency, he had carried out research and had made the judgment. Now, I know that because I had been member of a high council with him as a member of the state presidency a previous 2 or 3 years before that particular member of the state presidency was obsessed with non-tithe payers in the stake. I remember being in a stake meeting where he stood up and ranted to all the leaders in the stake and he held up a list of names and said, there is no way that these people are paying full tithing. I want you to find out what's going on in your wards and get these people into your offices and interview them and find out what's going on, because we're not getting full tithe payments. And I just sat there in that meeting and thought, this just doesn't feel like the Church of Christ. It doesn't feel like the priesthood being exercised the way it should. It doesn't feel good at all. And if this is what the church being run is like, I don't feel as if I can be a part of that. And then so we fast forward 3 years to me being in the office. I eventually do get the temple recommend, but I had to grovel for it.
Can I also just jump in just to clarify, were we to role play this for a tiny second, someone, the bishop says, or the state president says, are you a full tithe payer? You say yes, and then they move on to the next question.
That's normally what's supposed to happen. But
yeah,
because there was all this doubt and there was all these questions being asked, and essentially members of the state presidency were trying to guess how much a member would be earning based on the job or career they had. I have never heard of that before in all my church life until that point. And I think that stems from the pressure that's put on them from their superiors, the people who are above them as well, because stats, numbers and figures are important to the church. And that reflects on how well a leader is doing their job, or a stake or a ward or a branch is doing their job. So it's the reality was, my question was always, how can the person in front of you know whether or not you've been a full tithe payer and grill you in that manner if they do not know all of the commitments that you have personally within your family household income and what you are paying for, what your bills are, what your outgoings are, all those different things. They cannot possibly know what your circumstances are, because what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to interview you in a manner that they are placing that trust in you. I would wager the possibility that that person, if you were to ever speak to them about it, which would never happen, they would wager that they still would stand by the fact that they didn't think I was a full tithe payer, and that they perhaps had a gift of discernment because they were a state leader. So there's always a get out clause for people in these situations. That was what we call, and certainly when it comes to trauma, that was my critical event, because we went on holiday after that weekend. We went to the temple, and I had the time to sit down and think about things. And I was in a very dark place during our holiday that week, the following week, and I was thinking things over so much, and it really completely rocked me to the core. I've never had an experience like it with a church leader. And another thing happened as well, which really sealed the deal for me. When we were going through all that with Logan, and the same with Ben on his mission, and I had all these personal things going on, I wasn't coming out to church very much, but I just decided to pop into a priesthood lesson.
Yeah.
And I went into the priesthood lesson. I wasn't attending sacrament or the other lesson. I just decided I'll go into the priesthood lesson. We sat down. There was a visitor from America there. I didn't know who he was at the time, but he just sat quietly as well. And the lesson was on something like the normal type of lesson, like the atonement or prophets or something like that.
It's usually how you get through your trials. In our ward, it's how to cope with trials. Like every
yeah. And so Scott says, nice haircut, by the way, to you, Jane. So I remember we were in that lesson, and I thought, right, okay, I'll just sit here and take part. I'll just listen to the lesson. It started 10 minutes in. We'll have all these discussions about whatever it is about the atonement, and they were having a nice chat. A couple of scriptures are read, a couple of people answered questions. Then one of the high up leaders in the ward introduced the issue of homosexuality into the lesson, just injected it into the lesson from nowhere. And the rest of the lesson from that point on to the very end was all about bashing homosexual people, how evil and horrible and disgusting it was. Everybody in that room knew my situation with my family, and yet that lesson just continued. It was absolutely deplorable, and I never spoke up the whole thing. The whole lesson, I never said a word. I just sat there in disbelief, but I feel as if I had said something, I would have probably I would have regretted what I would have said or done. Some people would judge me and say, you probably should have said something, but you weren't there. It's me. And maybe I should have spoken up, I don't know. But anyway, the visitor who was there from the USA, at the very end of the lesson, just before it was going to finish, said, "Can I just say, brethren, I have a son who is gay, and I have never sat in a lesson like this in church. And I do not understand why this lesson has taken place. And it certainly has not impressed me as I've come into this world, or words to that effect. And I just thought, my goodness, whoever that, I know who it was that changed the subject. I know the person who injected that into the lesson, and I have a sneaky suspicion, I can't prove it, I don't know if I'm correct or not, that they did it deliberately because I was there, because I hadn't been there for a long time, and I just appear, and someone decided that the best thing to do for Brother Hunter was to have a lesson bashing homosexual people and being critical of them after everything that I've experienced with my son. And that wasn't the critical event. The critical event that started it off was the tithing event with the member of the state presidency. The one that sealed the deal was that. That was the one that sealed the deal for me. And I just thought, you know what? You guys can have at it. You guys can continue with what you're doing. But this is not the place for me. This is not the place for my family. And I'm out of here. I'm not involved anymore.
You had told me, it's funny, it's not like we tended to talk every week, but you would be out in the foyer and I would get to sort of bump into you, but I got to hear that day. And first of all, I want to say on the speaking out thing, when you are a member of a faith where we hear things all the time on a Sunday that we think, oh, Jesus would be putting that right if he were here. Shall I say something? Shall I not? We are constantly in that wrestle about, do I speak up and do I say what I know is right? Do I rebut? And 9 times out of 10, we let it go because it's not really that big a deal, or we get so sick of the sound of our own voice or whatever it is. And so when we do that, having to always be that person in a ward and in a class is exhausting. No matter how well received it tends to be, no matter how thoughtful, because these things are done with so much thought, because we want to make sure that we are not hurting or offending, even though no one is concerned that you're hurt or offended,
Mm-hmm.
And so to have to go to church every week and do that, and when you take that step back, and after months, that's the first time of walking through those doors. And I remember that whole week just wrestling with it. I need to go talk to Drew. I'm going to go and just knock his door. And it turned out I think you did have a lot on that week, so you wouldn't have been home anyways, what you would later tell me. But the following Sunday, what I had really wanted to say the whole week, what I'd been storing up, was I was gutted that nobody said anything. I was gutted that, and okay, that thing happened at the end and that's awesome and you're a visitor, but all your people, all of your faith community, who are men, were sitting there and they didn't stop that. They didn't say anything. And I am so sorry, because if I had have, obviously we have gender separated classes and it's not like I ever would be in your class, but if I had been there, Drew, I would have said something. And I'm so sorry that you had to hear that. And I know that you would have too, Alana. I know that so many people would have been there, but it hurts too much to go, because they know that that's what they're going to hear when they come through the doors. I know that because of that lesson, other people were so horrified and so affected by it that they also stopped going to church too. And so it's not even necessarily about people who don't speak out, because I think the pain of when you expect to be in a safe place and ecclesiastical abuse and spiritual abuse is happening right before your eyes, it's unbelievable. It's bullying, and it's not acceptable, and I'm so sorry, Drew.
No, thank you. Thank you.
So that was when you stopped coming to church. Tell me where you're at now. Are you happy?
Yeah, well, very. Something that I want to say when I'm thinking about what I just said is something that's said by members of the church a lot, just as a convenient excuse for people who leave the church, is that they left because they were offended. And it's such an easy thing to roll off the tongue. It's such an insensitive and thoughtless thing to say as well in a lot of situations. Was I offended by that? Absolutely. There is this train of thought that exists now where you don't have to take offence. If you take offence, that's a personal decision. I'm sorry, but it's not as simple as that. It's not as clear cut as that. You can be offended very easily by someone, particularly if what they're saying or doing is harmful to you or another person, and whether they accept that as being harmful or not is it's not a question or an issue. The people can be offended by silly things. That's not a silly thing to be offended by. I didn't leave the church. I've not left the church because I've been offended. That's not the reason I've left the church. I've left the church because of a long series of experiences and questions that I have taken upon myself to answer and find out the proper answers to them, and intellectually reach a decision that I no longer want to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, you can, as I've said before, and I'll always say it, you can debate with me and argue with me the whole night long about doctrine, theology, what's in the scriptures, even history to an extent, although you'd be in very shaky ground as a Mormon on that. But when it comes to personal experience, you cannot debate or argue with someone over personal experience. And all I would say is, instead of looking at the person and seeing someone that you consider to be a victim or someone who's been offended, try and see the person as just someone else to love, someone else to care for. And you don't have to understand them straight away. You just have to listen. Because we live in a world where it's just noise everywhere. It's noise coming from our phones, noise coming from our computers, noise coming at us from all directions. And lots of people have got things to say. We just need to listen more. If the world would be a much lovelier place, it wouldn't be perfect, but it would tick along a lot more nicely if people could just stop, close their mouth, and just listen. Just intently listen to other people. I'm in a good place, by the way.
I just wanted to quickly say it's nothing extravagant. But
no, it is. You go, you see it. It's extravagant.
I was just thinking, like when Drew's saying that, about the many reasons why he's left, and I think as well, again, I like to say people will be thinking, but I know that a lot of people probably think that Drew just woke up one morning and thought, I'm not going back to church, and it was just as easy as that. And I think people within the church buildings need to realise that for a lot of people who have been so into church now, for me, I've been in and out all my life, and it's still been a hard process for me, but, it was probably a little bit easier at times for me to just walk away because I've done it time and time again. But I think what they need to realise is that for Drew, I mean, how many years was this over, Drew, between your first thing and your shelf breakers?
Between that first thing and the lesson, when they said those things in the lesson, we're talking probably about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. So, there's 3-4 years where all this is going on for Drew. He's still, kind of attending church, trying to figure things out. And that's the way it was for me. And I just think sometimes if people could see the pain that's caused by this, because Drew, I'm sure right now, although you're happy, there's still probably a lot of stuff, you mentioned about going for counselling, which I hear a lot on like Mormon stories and things. do people truly believe that after being in a religion like that it's just as easy to just leave because you were offended or just leave because you want to sin? If only people could realise sometimes the pain and hurt and anger and everything that's caused by leaving the church. It's not just as black and white as, oh, they just left or they were offended. You know, because as I've said, for me, there's been so many emotions throughout my transition over the last, how many years? COVID till now, but prior to COVID, it's probably been same Drew, maybe 4 or 5 years for me.
Right.
And it's not just been as easy as I just left because I wanted to drink alcohol or, I wanted to do this or I wanted to do that. It's been a very painful journey.
Well, see, on that point, Alana, an interesting thing is, I've said to some people online, do you think I asked for this? Do you think I went out to look for this? Who in their right mind wants to put themselves through trauma?
Yeah, exactly.
Look at victims of abuse in other situations or circumstances. They don't ask for to be abused. They don't ask to have all of the effects of trauma to deal with.
Yeah.
I didn't ask for those things. Those things came my way as I was trying to be a good member of the church.
Yeah.
And they came the way of my children as well, who were also trying to be the best that they could in church. And you can only take so much.
Yeah.
And it's something that you don't look for. It's something that just happens and comes your way. See, active members of the church who have not experienced all of these things and are still active. That's probably why you're still active. And maybe you would go through all those things and you could handle it and you could justify in your mind all of those things happening to your children. I cannot justify those things happening.
Drew, what does it feel like for you if you had to walk into a church building right now, if you had to walk into a chapel, what physically and mentally would your reaction be? What would it have been at the height of you struggling? What was it like for you having to walk into church with all of that?
It takes a lot. It actually felt like the last place on earth I wanted to be. And sometimes I would go just because I thought, because what you have is you've got all of this conditioning, this programmed conditioning that you have built up through your neural circuitry for all those 40 years previously, that all has to be unpacked and deprogrammed. And at that stage, I was at the early stages of that. And so I feel I have to be there, but I don't want to be there. So it's like a struggle. It's like pulling you and pulling you apart. You don't want to be there because the place is hurting you. It's damaging you. It doesn't make you feel good. But there is this logical side of your brain, or this irrational side of your brain. Sorry, I should say, these irrational beliefs that you have to be in this place because it's the church. If I was to go into a church building today, I don't think I would bother that much. To be honest.
You're definitely you've
if
worked.
If any, and I still consider a lot of the people up at the ward who I think are still active. I've got a lot of people who I consider good friends, who are active members of the church, and I'm at the stage where I would say I would be very direct with them, and I think they all know where I am at. I'm sure they all know where I'm at. I wouldn't be nasty because it's not within my nature to be that way. But I would be extremely direct, and I would not take any nonsense from anyone. I am not a project. None of my family are projects. We are not a Relief Society assignment or a priesthood assignment anymore. We're not even members of the church anymore. So they should concentrate their efforts on the people that they've got there at the church and looking after them and being kind to each other, instead of trying to increase the numbers at the end of every quarter or at the end of every year. They should just focus on looking after people and loving people in a genuine, unconditional manner.
It's funny you say that. I remember a while back, missionaries years ago now asking me, is there anyone, we could teach? And I very honestly said to them, I think you need to fix the ward first and the people in that before you start bringing new people. And I didn't mean that in a bad way, that anyone was majorly, but the way the ward was, I felt it wasn't a healthy place to bring new members into.
I get that. I totally get that.
Alana, what does it feel like for you walking into a church building? What are some of the physical sensations that you have?
I still have a lot of anxiety around it. I hope that one day I won't have that. It wasn't so bad when I went to Amber's kids' sacrament presentation, because it was in a different stake, a different branch, sorry, that I had never been to. So I was kind of okay with that. But when it's anything, and it saddens me that I feel that way, because there's so many people there that I still love, but it's that anxiety of wondering, are people going to say this to me, or, you know, are they going to mention, oh, when are you coming back to church, which did happen to me. Not when, but, you know, I'd love to see you back at church. And that was at a funeral, you know, and I'm like, really, you know? So I do still get a lot of anxiety and things like that about church. It's not really somewhere that I feel that I need to be anymore. Obviously, I had to go for my chat with the stake president, and I was very anxious. You'll know that yourself. I was a bit, you know, I made sure I stayed till the end where I could just slip in when the meeting had kind of started, things like that. Yeah, it's not good for me to be going to a church building. You know, the anxiety I had even in the lead up to me leaving, and that was me trying to be an active member. It wasn't a good place for me. I feel so much healthier and happier not having that.
And I think that's why it's quite interesting to hear from people who have had this kind of, let's call it what it is. This is ecclesiastical abuse that you've experienced. That when you are raised and you've spirituality had been it is a huge part of your life. You construct a life based on this. This is the language of heaven for you. This is how you're communicating with the divine and those parts of yourself that are reaching out to the divine. And you go to the place that is specifically prepared for you to do that. You're going to be attacked. And it's your trust is broken, your confidence is broken. Sorry, we're having
I know, I can hear Hatchie's paws running across
so
the floor.
sorry. There had to be a kid or a dog come in, so and now he's playing the ball.
Daisy's interrupted multiple times as always.
But yeah, you know, we end up having people. Hatchie is getting torn into the bottom tonight. We end up having members of the church who are, you know, even active, who I get such bad church anxiety. You know, we'll talk to members who are shaking, who can't sleep the days in the lead up to church, who are, you know, reading a lesson topic with dread, who are finding foyer church much more comfortable, much more easy to bear than it is to go in amongst the discussion, because it doesn't feel safe. And you know, that's a problem on so many different levels. There are so many things that needs addressing. You know, Drew, you've mentioned a good few of them. I am really excited to hear the next episode of your show. We're going to put a link again in the notes to make sure that you can see that. We're going to link to the, you know, some research on the bite model and those types of things. But I guess my final question for you is, couldn't you just have stayed where you were in that space for longer, just not engaging with church? Just what made you take the decision to eventually resign your membership just a few months ago?
Yeah, this sounds like hyperbole, which I'm about to give. I'm going to give a comparison, and I don't mean to offend anyone when I give this comparison, but I will explain it. There is a man who was around at the time of the Nazis, and his name was August Landmesser. August Landmesser had the opportunity to become a member of the Nazi Party, and some of his family did. He didn't become a member of the Nazi Party because he was aware of some of the terrible things that they were doing, and he decided that instead of joining that party, he would speak out against them and not be associated with them in any way. There is also a good example of a man called Wilhelm Hosenfeld. And Wilhelm Hosenfeld was the person who served as a captain in the Wehrmacht, the German army. He was a Nazi. He was a member of the Nazi party. And he became more disenchanted and disenfranchised with the things that the Nazis were doing. He was appalled at the treatment of Jews and other groups of people. And he decided that he would want to do everything he could to have no association, even though he served as a soldier in the German army in Warsaw and Poland. The reason I mention those two, and by the way, I'm not trying to compare the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with the Nazi Party, although that's the comparison I'm using, because they are two very, 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 very different organizations. But the point I'm trying to make is the comparison is, I do not want to be associated with an organization that conducts itself in a manner that, for example, just to use a couple, protects abusers over the abused in situations where children have been abused by church leaders who really shouldn't have been given the responsibility, where people who have been homosexual have been in a situation where they've had to go through conversion therapy or whatever else they are forced to do in order to be a part of this organization. I cannot associate myself with an organization that carries out, that formally in its organization with its leadership, I'm talking about the First Presidency and the 12 Apostles and everyone else, knowing that these decisions are made with their okay. I cannot be a part of an organization that's allowed to do those things. And as far as I'm concerned, that is not Christ. Where I am religiously right now, but that is not Christ, as far as I'm concerned. And I will not have my name on the records of a church that is happy and encourages those types of abuses to take place. That's the reason. Now, I don't want to guilt trip anyone who is a member or who is struggling with their membership. That's a personal journey that everyone has to go through. I suppose I'm a history teacher. I learned the worst of humanity and the things that people will do in large groups and the way that they treat people. And for me, I do not want to have a part in that at all.
And I commend you for your integrity.
Yeah.
One of the things we hear frequently said in Mormonism and ex-Mormonism is, and our colleague, wonderful Sunstone UK organiser Laura Heath will frequently quote, hard on systems, soft on people. And I agree. I hear where you guys are coming from. I quote that a lot myself. But again, nor am I making any comparisons with the church and the Nazi party. But what I would say is that we learned from the Nuremberg trials that the defence of I was just following orders is in any way sufficient. And so I like and engage with the idea of activism, and it's part of why the Brit Vengers sort of all came together at this really exciting time, that there is a work to be done. And if you're not there yet, if you're a member of the church who's perfectly happy where you are, that is awesome. I am really happy for you, and I'm excited for your journey. What I would ask is for listening and empathy and compassion, so that we can come together and have really exciting and interesting discussions just like this, without having to assign, some sinister motive for how someone isn't there when you haven't even heard their story. The church is better with Drew there. The church is better with his whole family there. And we will have to continue somehow with this hole in our ward that was once there. And we will never be the same without them. And we need to hold ourselves to account for that, for all of the people, all of the best and brightest that we are losing. We want people to be safe at church, whatever way that looks. Before I bring us to a close tonight, and again, we'll put all of this information in the show notes. You all know that it's the part of the conversation that Alana and I, where we reclaim our I don't know what is it, authority, as just sisters, as women, whether you're in the church, whether you're out of the church. In the same way as I would bless my child or bless my friend, bless my those I care about. Alana and I get to do that, just now. And at any other time that you need us, Drew, we are here to bless you, to comfort you, and to be with you. But for tonight, we want to bless your journey, that as you're working on being the best version of you, as you're working on healing, as you're working on being the best husband and father and grandparent and all of those things, that you are blessed to feel the love that your family has for you and that your friends have for you, and that you can feel that exquisitely and deeply, and that you never have to doubt that you are alone. We bless you to be able to heal with grace and dignity, and to continue to learn from all of the things that have happened to you, and for your voice to be a blessing in the life of all of those who get to hear it, who get the privilege to hear it. Drew, you're going to do great things, and I feel like that is a prophetic utterance, and those are the things that we want to bless you with. I'm so excited for your journey, and we bless every step of it.
Thank you.
Okay, as we head on out tonight, I'll come to Alana first, then Drew second. Alana, any words you want to leave us with tonight? Anything you're thinking? I love that every week you're surprised when I do that. It actually warms my heart.
I know you're going to do it, but I just, me, I'm the kind of person, if I feel that I've got something to say, I usually kind of try and say it. No, just thank you, Drew, for sharing your story and giving us your time. We're really grateful for that. I've got my sister messaging me here to see if I'm tired.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think Drew, you made a lot of valid points, about that. It's something that I speak about a lot as well, about just, love the person. It shouldn't be about a number or a stat, or, that's just something I always keep re-emphasising, is just love people. I always say if people would just love people, the world would be a better place. I don't think I've got much else to say.
What's hysterical is that any time Drew has ever said anything online on social media, and you get those types of responses that are not members of the church at their finest, you're always going to have Alana in the comments ready to batter anybody who's given her Drew grief, and never change. I love it.
Oh, if people could see me behind the scenes, I'm like, how dare they say that?
Do not mess with her, Drew. Drew, do you have any final words for us?
Yeah. Can I just say that I have been reading every single comment as it's come up on the right of my screen, and I did want to try and make I know, Jane, that you brought in some of the questions that were asked when you were you asked me those questions, and I'm grateful for that. But I want to say to everyone who's left a comment, whatever comment it is, I read every single comment, and I appreciate all the comments. And if I ever go back to this podcast, I'll read the comments again, and I wish I could have addressed what everyone has said, but I never had the opportunity to. But what I will say is, whenever I have conversations with people, mainly online on social media, on Facebook, I have always tried to get people to think about what they're saying and why they're saying it, and to listen and to ask questions, instead of just all of this ego and putting themselves in pedestals and trying to make a point so that it makes them look good. I'm not about that. For me, it's the issues. when we come away from the issues and it's all about exercising and flexing our egos, then something has gone wrong and things don't get better and there's more division. We will never, as a society, become a people that try and welcome each other or come together unless we are willing to put our egos to the side and just speak as civil and respectful people about our differences and respect those differences and try to understand the differences. We need to be doing that more. And we need to be doing that online because we do live our lives online a lot, although I'm not on it as much. But in our day-to-day lives and online, we need to just be nice, understanding people. We don't have to agree. We just have to be nice. That's all.
If anyone does want to reach out to you after having heard tonight's conversation, are you happy for them to do that? And if so, how can people get in touch?
Messenger. When I posted the video, that my long video, quite a few people sent me messages. I think one of the people a few people certainly in the chat are people that reached out to me on Messenger. So you can send me something on Messenger, Drew Hunter. Just type it in, and the message will come through. Or you can email me at drewthepoo7@gmail.com. That's my email.
I love that you've never changed that. That's keep it forever.
Yeah.
It's my hope that we are going to continue to hear Drew's thoughts, because really Drew is one of our most beloved, thoughtful, bright minds here in the Mormon spectrum. And I want to keep hearing more. There is so much that he hasn't even begun to talk about yet. So I hope that you find that this is an engaging space, one that you are stimulated by, but also I really want to recommend, if you haven't listened to Drew's work, it's one episode is all you have to catch up on. It's going to be linked in the show notes. Go check it out because you're going to really, really love it. This is worth listening to, and let him know what you think.
And Paul's just asking, when is your next one coming out, Drew, on your second episode?
Oh, I just finished writing it today, so then I need to record it, and so it will be, what day is this? Wednesday.
Tuesday. Wednesday.
So
Tuesday.
I'm hoping that it will be by the end of the week, but it could be next week.
Next week.
Excellent. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, audience. And thank you so much, our guest Daisy, who's in the background, making sure that we're all behaving. If you have liked what we are doing, we would encourage and ask you to please like our YouTube page, subscribe to our YouTube page, come and say hi or like us on Facebook, all of the social media channels. We're pretty much everywhere. We're on Twitch tonight, we're on Twitter. So please do subscribe. If you would like to make a donation to help us do the work that we do, you can find a link again in the show notes. And again, we would just really ask that if you have any questions, anything that you'd like to follow up with Drew about, do check out his Facebook page. And we will see you all next week. You all be safe, and we bless all your journeys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. See you later.